Word has it that there are games that are launching on October 27th, and one of those games is a new Assassin's Creed, which it's been
a while.
A whole 2 years.
2 years. It's weird, right? Like, that's totally normal for a sequel, and yet come last fall, I was like, where's my Assassin's Creed game? This is normally the time I get to play an Assassin's Creed game. And I
had that movie.
Yeah. Well, I had the movie.
That wonderful movie.
We'll talk about this some more later, but have you noticed that the new game totally tries to integrate the movie's fiction?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh,
I know.
God, you're not selling me right there.
So we're going to talk about it.
But I do think it's funny. Just talking about the timing. I overhear things from my office. People going to the kitchen. I'm close to the kitchen, and so I hear people kind of talking about their day as they go by, and I did hear Miller go, "It's been so long. I'm kind of excited about it." and I just thought that was so funny. It was like, and Miller, loves the Assassin's Creed series, so it was funny to hear him just kind of like that. You talk about 2 years isn't that long, but you were getting antsy.
Getting antsy for some stabbing.
He was thinking about making a leap of faith off the edge of the office. He was like finding barrels of straw to like bring into the office.
So that was a level of excitement, but you are not reviewing this Assassin's Creed. You reviewed very many Assassin's Creed. So is Jojuba. So new to the fray.
Yeah.
In comes a new challenger.
That's right.
Is Suriel. So let's start with you, Suriel. So let's set up for anyone that doesn't know. Tell us what is the kind of basic kind of structure. What makes Assassin's Creed Origins?
Well, so the extra year they took off, they basically used to make a lot of sweeping changes to a bunch of different things about Assassin's Creed. And I think the good part about it is that it still feels like an Assassin's Creed game, but it does feel like it is a more modernized version of sort of the Assassin's Creed formula.
Okay, so when you say modern, tell me what makes it modern.
Well, it moves more towards sort of the trend of having these very expansive open world games. I thought a lot about Metal Gear Solid 5 when I was playing this, in terms of both sort of how big the environments were and sort of the kinds of environments. There's a lot of deserts because the game is based in Egypt.
Yep.
In ancient Egypt, and so there's a lot of like very jagged cliff sides and like sweeping deserts that you're running across, and they do a really good job of making that world feel populated without sort of going against the idea of like it's very big, and there are going to be periods of time where you're just sort of running from one space to another.
I played Assassin's Creed 1. I know about running from one space to another.
So it does return to that a little bit, where, I mean, Assassin's Creed 1 was sort of like a central area that sort of spoked off into like 3 separate cities. But this feels like there is one big area that has sort of interesting places to go everywhere, instead of like you're just basically running around from one city to the next.
My experience, Suriel's played through the entirety of this game, has really plumbed its depths, and I'm pretty early yet. I will say, though, I would agree with everything that you just said, except I'm not yet sold on the one point you said, which is that it feels like an Assassin's Creed game.
Yeah.
That's where I'm still kind of up in the air about. And that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. Like evolution of a franchise is sometimes good, and I think people would say that taking a year off and going back to the drawing board on some systems was a wise thing for them to do. The stuff that I have played so far, though, does lean a lot more towards the kind of like RPG, open world sort of dynamic than it does towards classic Assassin's Creed play.
So let's clarify some things here, because I think myself and other people who are interested in perhaps playing Assassin's Creed. I mean, Assassin's Creed has essentially always been open world, other than like certain levels or side missions or something like that have had like some linear parts to it. So when you say open world to me, an RPG, I mean, there's been RPG elements to every Assassin's Creed ever. So so what specifically doesn't feel Assassin's Creed about? I mean, you still stab people in the face, right? You still get stealth through crowds. I mean, those parts are all there. What is separating this from previous Assassin's games?
So one of the big things that changes is the I would say maybe the biggest thing that changes is the combat.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
I would say, yeah, it's probably one of the biggest things.
Okay. Like the combat, and again, I'm not calling it out like this is, I'm not far enough yet. I mean, to be able to say this is good or this is bad,
Right.
but it definitely feels different from what you're expecting. The previous Assassin's Creed games used some variation of the same counter and attack formula that you see in games like Batman or Mordor, right? It's this sort of acrobatic leaping, stabbing,
sort of
counter,
tiny base,
kind of experience. That is almost entirely gone. There's nothing of that here in this game. And that feels very strange to me in an Assassin's Creed game. It feels like it draws inspiration from a lot of other sources now, including something like Witcher, maybe.
Yeah, so it feels, I mean, visually it looks very different because the lock-on camera is a lot more focused on sort of pinning you towards one enemy. So it can often feel like, it can look like combat from Dark Souls or Zelda, where it is you are taking on one enemy at a time and you are sort of watching one enemy while keeping a few others in mind. Whereas in Assassin's Creed, it felt like you were trying to keep track of multiple enemies at once and waiting for the right moment to sort of respond to what they were doing.
So this combat is more like a block attack kind of scenario?
Yeah, that is exactly what it is.
Okay.
It's you're holding up your block. Occasionally you're dodging.
So some enemies will have attacks that you can't block, and they'll show up as red, and you can dodge out of the way of those. And if you see an enemy that's blocking, that's what the heavy attack is for breaking their guard. So you do sort of, rather than sort of working off the rhythms they give you, you are sort of working more to establish your own rhythm of like, I'm going to attack this person, I'm going to break their guard, I'm going to hit them with a combo, and then if my meter is full, because different weapons have like special moves that you can do, I'm going to finish them off with like a special move.
So the result is a feeling of it's not necessarily something I'm ready to call like a combat experience that I don't enjoy, but it's not a combat experience that feels like Assassin's Creed to me.
Well, I will say this. For the last few Assassin's Creed, as they were starting to really reel them off, right? Mm-hmm. And I was starting to get frustrated myself with like, what combat idea do they have now? Okay, how do I climb now? And we talk about minutia of like, oh, well, hey man, now climbing down the side of a tower is a lot easier than before. Isn't that great? And I'd be like,
you kind of liked having.
They made a lot of updates, but not sort of very significant changes.
Yeah, I was always like, yeah, okay, sure, yeah, I can go down the side of this tower in a much more elegant fashion than I could in the past. But this game isn't better, and whatever I lost to gain this, kind of lost. It's kind of the thing to me. I felt like it was doing the thing where if I got a next Batman game, right, I want that core Batman mechanic to be there and then to be expanded upon and improved upon. And I felt like Assassins kept walking away from improving upon what they had.
Yes.
So what I would say is, when you talk about this combat, is this a good base that we can start to build off of? Or is this just another one of their just madness? We just have to change everything to change everything because we can't stick to one thing.
It feels to me like the combat is a system, and I really am very interested in your take on it because I know you had a slightly different experience with it. But it feels like something that's way more accessible.
Okay, so accessibility is what we got.
Everybody's got light, and everybody understands light attack, heavy attack, block. Yeah. Right. That's a thing that a lot of games do, and like it feels like that's something that Assassin's Creed has said, like, you know what, let's just do that.
Okay.
Like everybody's going to be able to get that. Similarly, I think the climbing, virtually every place that you go, anytime there's a surface in front of you, do you want to go up that surface? It doesn't matter. Their handholds. Don't worry about that. Just go up that. Like, just go up that wall. Right? Is there a viewpoint up there on the top of that cliff?
Just go climb.
Just go climb the cliff. Like, you don't need to find a path to the cliff. Just go there. And so there's a move across a number of areas towards familiar, accessible play that nobody's going to be able to have a problem with.
Yeah, or get frustrated.
Necessarily. But it also, like, another thing, we've got hunting animals in this game, right? Like, that's a system that's shown up in several different Assassin's Creed games. And previously, there's often been like, okay, well, I need to get that one bear. How am I going to confront that bear? Okay, I got to sneak around behind this ridge and get the right arrows ready. And like, what am I going to do here? Here, what I do is I get on my horse. There's a bunch of gazelles out there, and I run my horse at them, and I swing my sword, and they all die. They're just dead. And like, there isn't a lot of thrill to that experience for me.
There wasn't a lot of drama in the delivery of that story. You know what I mean? I'm saying that sounds disappointing.
And so those are things that I think I struggle with. But though I am leading with some negative thoughts here, I will say that there are a lot of things that they have changed that feel really exciting. I mean, Egypt, is gorgeous.
It is quickly becoming sort of one of my favorite environments. Even though it does feel sort of, again, like a big change from the here's a really crowded cityscape with lots of buildings that you can jump between. This is a lot more sparse. I mean, there are cities sort of like Alexandria that do have that sort of
the urban
feel, but a lot of it does feel like you're climbing the wilderness in a way that I think Assassin's Creed 3 tried, but didn't really sort of successfully infuse with sort of the Assassin's Creed climbing. Whereas here, like Miller said, if you're sort of climbing up a sort of like a cliff, there's no sort of conspicuous handholds along the way that you have to sort of navigate between. You just sort of climb on something and you'll just go up.
Okay.
But yeah, I think one of my favorite parts of most Assassin's Creed games is the idea of being in this historical world, and I think Egypt pulls it off by and it isn't afraid of like, well, we can't just have deserts. We have to have like crazy things going on everywhere, and there are things to find in those like larger areas. But there are some areas after I beat the game I was like I hadn't even been to yet, and I just sort of traveled along those and I didn't really find anything, which like makes it feel a little bit empty. But like I was to some degree okay with it because it was just sort of a very different looking locale that I was traveling through.
Assassin's Creed has often, with its settings, managed to find moments in history that are not only compelling, but that have complexity to their presentation. And what I mean by that is that, like, rather than just going to a moment in history that is like, oh, it's cool to be in this city because that was a cool city, they will instead choose places that are rife with intercultural conflict and cooperation, and they'll choose moments where it was at times turning points within history, right?
Yeah.
And
I was there when George Washington and Jefferson.
Yeah, sure. And some of those things have been more or less successful, but you can't fault them for like their selection and their presentation of those experiences, right? The actual gameplay that happens there has not always been perfect, but once again with Egypt, I feel like even though this is by a wide margin the furthest back in history that they've gone, it's such a cool setting. You see these ancient Egyptian folks and their interesting religion and cultural practices that I'm very confident were researched extensively to get as accurate as they possibly could. And you're seeing that interact with like Greek culture and Roman culture, all of which was sort of percolating together during this moment in history in these places where in a place like Alexandria, where you get to go into the great library of Alexandria that years later would be gone, would be burned to the ground, right? And here we get to go into those places, and so that thrill that has always been there for Assassin's Creed is in some senses even more intense here because it's a place that's so far back and is so unknown, and we're getting to see these places that have been rebuilt by Ubisoft's artists and writers and stuff like that,
and bent a little bit. I mean,
undoubtedly.
There's like giant scorpions, right?
There's a lot of. They also muck with the history a little bit too. Like, I mean, you do meet Cleopatra, who's a big part of the game, but there's also like Praxilla and Vesuvius, who are just poets. They're not like, they're engineers and poets. They're not supposed to be fighting the resistance, but they're here anyway
because that'll be fun,
right?
Because everyone knows a true poet is the best warrior.
Yeah,
that's
right.
And so like warrior poet.
To what Miller was saying, there is sort of that clash of like the Romans are very slowly encroaching on the Egyptian culture. Like the character you play as Bayek is given to you as the last of the Magi, which is sort of an ancient order of like military scouts that protected Egypt. But a lot of people just see them as this outdated thing because like the Romans are doing, like, they have a much more powerful military presence. So and you see them sort of trying to take over the area over the course of the game. And I think it does a really good job of like leaning into that conflict of those two cultures.
Yeah, it's really cool. And that has been thus far in the hours I've played the thing that I'm most excited about is seeing these places, seeing in the distance and being excited about going there because I haven't yet. Like you see the pyramids at Giza, right? And you're like, oh, that's going to be cool. I want to go check that out. And then, it got to the point where I was going into the library at Alexandria and being like, wow, this is awesome. The idea that maybe this was a real place that was filled with learning thousands of years ago.
Yeah, I definitely, I mean, it's funny because your body language and your reactions when we talk about the world has been extremely positive. And I don't want to just like circle back around to something negative again because I think that's exciting. I mean, I think that's good that they got the worlds right. I think they've pretty much always gotten the worlds right. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's always been a balance between. I like it when they lean into history. I mean, I liked that a lot about the early ones. I liked that when they leaned into reality, right, as well. I mean, I liked when they made everything seem real and then not seem real. I liked the way that it played with video games.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That did a thing that only video games could do. But I never really got your kind of final verdict on combat. Going all the way through, did it bore you by the end? Did it expand? Did it not matter?
I think that it definitely feels a lot sort of like a base, like you said. It feels like the first iteration of this new kind of combat because it does feel a little simple, but I think it integrates with the rest of the game in an interesting way because the world is a lot larger, and this ties into some of the sort of the other big rework I think, which is to mission design, where instead of having these optional objectives like, oh, make sure you kill the guy this specific way, or having things where you have to eavesdrop on people or follow them, they sort of revert to some of the Assassin's Creed 1 and 2 stuff where it's once you have your assassination target, they're just in that area and it's up to you to kill them however you can. And I think combat integrates with that really well because you'll start off a mission sort of trying to sneak a little bit, and then as you get spotted,
it goes to hell like it does in everyone.
It is a little bit slower. Like if someone happens to see you and you kill them, within a set period of time, you'll be able to sort of go back to sneaking. But once combat happens, because there are fewer enemies and there are more interactions with them, it does feel like it has a little bit of variety. But I think there are gladiator arenas where you just take on waves of enemies, and those aren't as interesting because they don't have sort of
both parts of that loop. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they don't have sort of like you're fighting enemies in an interesting environment where more things, like ridiculous things, could happen. Like there are to speak to some of the RPG stuff, there are weapons that just are on fire all the time, and if you hit someone while they're near grass, that grass will light on fire, and then you could get lit on fire. So that has some interesting interactions there that make the combat more interesting.
Gotcha.
But in and of itself, it is sort of a little bit simple where once you figure out, like, here's the heavy enemy, I know exactly what I'm going to do against them, and it's 99% of the time it's just going to work. But once you introduce the idea of like this combat is part of this larger interacting number of systems, I think it does become like an interesting part of a whole.
Gotcha.
There's also one of the other big shifts that goes along with what Suriel is describing is that it's a loot-based game now. Which is a big change.
Yeah.
Like you're going through the game and very like something like Diablo or Destiny, you're constantly getting these drops of different tiered weapons. Like, ooh, I got a blue sword.
Can I buy loot baskets? I guess would be the appropriate.
I think I want to say that the loot boxes are the one thing you can't buy with real money, but you can buy pretty much everything else. You can buy new swords, you can buy new outfits, which are cosmetic. You can buy mounts, which are also cosmetic. But one of them
is a unicorn. Crafting supplies.
You can buy crafting supplies. You can buy the locations of every collectible in the game. Which, like, you look at that list and you're like, what do they do? Like, what? Why? Because with collectibles specifically, the fun is in finding that stuff, not in being told where it is.
But the secret is you get to 149 out of 150, and you spend 5 hours on it. And you go like, I don't care anymore. Take my money. And like, where is that last one?
I think the resource stuff is going to be the most tempting because I think the hunting stuff, some of the stronger animals take a little more hunting to do. But I think that at some point, I think people are just going to want, because what you do with them is you upgrade your armor and you upgrade the amount of damage your hidden blade does because it won't instantly kill everyone. So I think the most tempting thing is sort of that resource, the resource pack that they have. But I use the sort of the free credits they give you, but I never felt like oh, if only I had more resources at my disposal, because I felt like I was getting through the game just fine without having to sort of go take a second to grind for resources.
I think this game does what a lot of games in the last few months we've seen, which is that like the microtransaction stuff that is there is robust, but you don't have to engage with it.
Yeah. It never really bothers. It gives you like, here's 200 free credits. You never have to hear about it again. Like they're never like, if you're looking for resources, maybe you should spend money. I bet you don't really look that good. I bet if you look like Altair, I bet you'd be a lot happier. They don't really, they never design the systems in such a way to like nudge you towards making a purchase.
So when I first started,
I think they nudge you.
Well, they nudge you. They nudge you once,
yeah.
but they're not constantly reminding you like, hey, you can go buy stuff.
So it's just like every other game. When I first started to play it, I have to log into my UB account that I don't remember the password for. I have to reset my password, and
there's a UB club.
Oh God. Sometimes I want to turn a game on and play it when they make me do that. Sorry, but it just drives me crazy to go off the path there. Okay, so it sounds like combat gets a passing grade, but not phenomenal. Loot has changed the way the game's played. Great environment, great world. What about this makes it an Assassin's game? I mean, other than those kind of like this is supposed to be the origins. This is where it starts, right? Do they deliver on this story? Is the storytelling? Does it go? Does it go somewhere, or does it?
You want to talk about the beginning?
Yeah, the beginning is really confusing, and it is only in sort of going back after beating the game and playing the intro again that I was like, oh, okay, I know what's going on. But it starts in a very bewildering way of just, it starts in media res, so it's like in the middle of,
but not in a cool way.
Yeah, because it is just a lot of cuts of like that. If you don't know the story, it just looks like random things are happening on the screen.
I swear I started the game.
Is this when I'm required to have seen the movie to understand?
No, but that comes. We'll talk about that in a second. I was still downloading the game as it started. I was like, oh yeah, sweet. It got to that point I can like play.
Yeah.
Right. And when I started, I swear I thought for the first half an hour that like it had errored out and that it had accidentally jumped me ahead to like the 4th chapter. I'm not joking. Like I texted Suriel. It was late at night, and I made sure he was like awake and online before I did. But then I was like, what's happening? What? Is this my main character? Am I like in the game, or is this like? It feels like I'm not like it just doesn't feel like the beginning to a game. Like you see this weird sequence of starting images and like snippets of like cinematic sequences, and then suddenly you're in a place and you're like doing this thing, and it just confounds me how they've opened the game, because Assassin's Creed has so frequently had such powerful openings that really grabbed me, and this one does not do that.
They've also had training missions that have lasted.
They have,
I will say that on the other hand, they do a better job of sort of onboarding you. Whereas I think back to 4 Black Flag, where it had this really nice opening feature, but then it's like they've spent sort of a little too long sort of establishing how he ends up being a part of this conflict, and sort of like having missions where you just walk around and do various tutorial things that don't feel very in uninteresting ways. Whereas I think they do a much better job of very quickly sort of saying, okay, here's combat, because they start you with combat, and then they say, okay, now you can stealth if you want to take these guys out. Here's what your bird does. It sort of scouts the area and lets you find targets and resources. And then at some point they just kind of let you loose to just pursue story missions at your leisure.
Eventually, as an Assassin's Creed game, it does swing around, and you start getting some hints of how it's going to loop into this whole conflict of the things related to the Assassins, the Templars, the pieces of Eden, all that kind of stuff.
Race,
the precursors, all that stuff does eventually come into play, and that's important.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Also important, although I'll say ahead of time that we're not going to spoil it here.
Yeah.
There is a return to a meaningful narrative component within present day.
Yeah.
All right.
It's a little more substantial in that you actually do, control a character. That said, I think that I don't know that it necessarily goes anywhere that I found sort of super meaningful. It does tell like a very short, self-contained story of the person who is outside the Animus. But I never sort of left it saying like, oh, I know the plot of the present day has moved meaningfully forward. It feels like here we had to do something, right? And but that said, I think the story inside, like the historical story, I think is pretty good, mostly because I think Bayek, who is an interesting character, I think not maybe the series best, but he isn't sort of like a super happy-go-lucky playboy like Ezio, but he's not, he's not like Connor, who is very the stern, sort of very boring.
He's not
character.
stoic.
Yeah,
like he has connections within his community.
Right.
He has friends, and
his wife Aya sort of cut like there. She's a character with a lot of agency. She is sort of off doing her own thing, and so their paths intertwine like over the course of the game. And I found those moments to be really good because they do the story is really good because I think the supporting cast does a great job of fleshing out Bayek as a person. That said, a lot of the targets sort of bleed into one another. I think there are one or two targets that I think do a pretty good job of sort of establishing themselves as really good villains. But I think most of them, you'll say like, here's this guy's code name. You have to kill them because of the plot. And then here they are, go kill them, and then you'll kill them. And then they have like the short sequence where every time you assassinate a major target, they'll. For some, I still don't understand what exactly happens when you do that. Like you'll murder them, and then you cut to a scene where they're like pontificating.
It's
and
really weird. It's like a weird expansion of that old the brief conversation you'd have in this weird like etheric realm, right?
Yeah.
Now it's like these whole sequences, like really long,
very
kind of
involved. And you're not sure, well, like, did this actually happen? Is this sort of like them hacking the Animus?
Or is it like Bayek's dream of what?
Or also, too, they're like, I just killed you. Why did you kill me? Because you needed to die.
And,
and you're like, what?
And you're like, you're controlling these people. Those people needed to be controlled. And then you kill them again. And so, like, those exchanges are still kind of like weird, but sometimes like they're interesting. But I think a couple of them do sort of again like setting themselves up and also providing sort of interesting gameplay segments that I don't want to spoil too much, but I do find that the villains, like the supporting cast, I think outdoes the villains in this for the most part. But I overall I did enjoy sort of like the origin story going on here.
Okay, all right, so I was all in on Assassin's Creed at one point. I have slowly but surely fallen off. I want to love Assassin's Creed, but the last few games, every time I put them in, I just can't get engaged. Tell me why I need to play this one. Why do I need to play this one? It's because I have to know the origin? Is it because it's so fun to play? Because the world is so beautiful? Why do I have to
specifically, if you have sort of weaned off the Assassin's Creed like games in recent years, I think this one is a good one to jump back on, because I think over the years I played Black Flag and like had fun with it, but I wasn't crazy about it. And then even Syndicate, which I think a lot of people saw as like, okay, this series is doing really good things now. Even that game, I was sort of like, yeah, this is fun. I don't know if it's for me, and I was sort of like, before they announced that they were skipping a year, I was sort of ready to just say, I guess maybe I've fallen off this series. Like maybe I'm not just as big a fan as I thought I was, because I really like 2 is like maybe my favorite game that came out that year. So I was really into it at that point, but I very slowly sort of like fallen out of love with the series. But I think this one, brought me back in a really big way, just because it at times I think it can feel very different from the standard Assassin's Creed experience. But I think there is enough there that you do feel like this belongs in this series, but also I feel like it does a lot to change up what the series is now.
I'm super glad to have that perspective from you, right? Like because your experience with the most recent games is pretty different from mine.
Okay.
Right? Like and I think your experience is representative of a lot of people out there, right? Like there's a lot of people who remember being super excited about Assassin's Creed and then kind of fell away. Mm-hmm. I think I was one of the people for whom that you just described, who was like, I really like Syndicate.
Mm-hmm.
Like I thought that was a great game. I've never fallen away. And so my big challenge with this game is like, I feel like the more I'm able to divorce myself from expectations about what Assassin's Creed should be, the more I enjoy this game, because there's so many things that feel weird and not Assassin's Creed, and that they're looking to other franchises and other successful formulas and stuff that's more maybe accessible or familiar because it's been in popular open world RPGs.
Yeah,
those systems. if I can just like look at it as like, oh, this is an RPG about being in ancient Egypt, then I start getting excited.
Yeah.
And yet, when my brain flips back into thinking about it as it relates to my many years of engagement with these Assassin's Creed games, there's things that start to frustrate me.
Well, I mean, isn't that kind of the case though here altogether? I mean, I feel like even this is the origin story, I felt like they abandoned the original tale and the original world,
especially the modern
a long time ago.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it's interesting you brought up some of the like things I know from the early games, but like, I certainly don't trust the series to like, to bring any kind of loop that makes any sense, right? I mean, so it is to some degree you have to go into this fresh with a new look, a new kind of vibe, and run with it and say it's just got Assassin's Creed origins.
It is in a lot of the ways that matter, it is a new starting point for the franchise.
Yeah.
Whether it works for everybody, I am by no means at a place that I'm ready to pass judgment one way or the other about the game. I mean, it does seem like it's a really big game. Is that fair? It's got a lot of leveling and, a world to explore. There's a lot of cool looking side missions, a lot of interesting places to visit. And I'm having a lot of fun diving through and exploring that stuff. I just, there's a part of me that maybe is a little sad to not have some of the stuff I loved about those first games.
So what is your, give us the final verdict. We need to
Okay.
I think probably wrap up our talk about Assassin's Creed. Eventually we're just going to tell everybody what's going on in this game. What's your final thought?
I give it an 8.5 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. I think that it is, as someone who sort of fell out of love with the series, this is sort of the most excited I've been about the series in a long time.
Oh, well, I am definitely excited. The world intrigues me, right? And the positive vibe and the kind of excitement I got from you guys about the world is the thing that I think I'm most excited about. I think to myself, okay, maybe simple combat is good. I don't know. That part scares me a little bit, but it certainly looks good. It looks like a place I want to go, and that's a big thing for me in games is a world I want to live in. And it sounds like at least got that part right. Yeah. But you don't. I mean, it's not a 9. Historically, these games have done pretty high.
Yeah.
What is the major ding?
I think that so the combat can feel a little simple, like it can feel a little rote. I think a lot of the mission objectives end up being the same. Like even if you have sort of this very open space, it feels like, all right, go in and capture the target and just get them out of there. And also because it is very open, it can lead to a lot of anticlimactic moments. Like there was one mission where I was tasked with stealing a horse, and I basically one thing you can do is you can basically use horses as an Uber, where you just sort of climb on your horse, pin a point on the map, and just have the horse ride there automatically without controlling it. So I put it like, I'll put it on the base where the mission was, and I just rode on there. I checked my phone, and all of a sudden I looked up and I was at that horse that I needed to get. The guards hadn't seen me, and I just got off my horse, got on the other one, and just rode out of there. And all the guards saw me then, but it was just very like, all right, I guess that mission's done now. So it can lead to sort of some of these anticlimactic moments, but I think overall, I did have a lot of fun with it.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you both for your time. It's really interesting that Assassin's Creed is back. I'm interested to see how the world takes this game.
Yeah.
What kind of gets spit out, I guess, out the other end? Because I think that is the fun part. When you put it in front of a bunch of gamers, they will nitpick, but also find the things to love about a game like this. And there's always been a lot of things to love about Assassin's Creed.
Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version and listen to new episodes airing every Thursday. We cover big games on the horizon, games that we've just reviewed. We have long-form developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So check it out every Thursday.